Okay, this is the first of two lectures in intelligence. Um, the first lecture will be about the development of psychological assessments in the 20th century, and the second lecture will be about alternative views that began to emerge in the 1980s and generally leading us to a different concept of human intelligence in the 21st century. So, in the 19th century, some views about intellectual giftedness, how it ran in families, this became a popular idea. Francis Galton, a cousin of Darwin, he believed that intelligence is genetic, and he believed that certain classes of people were superior to others. So his view influenced the eugenics movement, which was a movement that about genetic superiority. However, nowadays we know that intelligence is at least 50% inherited, which means that the environment is actually playing a huge part. And it has a huge effect, and we know this from the scientific research. However, all things being equal, heredity does account for most of IQ differences between individuals based on the research. So let's start with the beginning of the 20th century, Binet's mental tests. Alfred Binet, he developed the first modern psychological assessments, and these were pretty much for the same purpose as psychological assessments today. They were used to identify children with in relation to their educational capacity. Um, and so today, this idea about special needs is hotly debated, and I think this is a really good topic for critical thinking and critical analysis. In our class on intelligence, we talked about this issue and an alternative view about special needs, which is additional requirements which the universities tend to use as opposed to schools. The idea of additional requirements is that some people have different requirements to others in terms of their educational um, generally, and it puts the emphasis on the institution as opposed to the individual. In the school system, we still have a system that focuses on individual children as having special needs, and more often than not, it is thought that that the resources won't stretch, and therefore they can't meet these needs of these children. And so it's really putting the emphasis onto the child who has some sort of a deficit. And so we had a very interesting discussion about terminology and how we can critically evaluate this kind of terminology. So um, this refers to labeling and concepts of discrimination. So it basically asks us what is the purpose really of IQ tests. Just to backtrack a little bit, IQ as cognitive abilities, this idea came about in around the 1920s, 30s, 40s. Spearman was a statistician, and he became involved in measuring cognitive abilities, and the abilities he focused on were verbal, spatial and mathematics. He found that when people were good at one of these, they tended to be good across all of them, and when they were weak at any one, then they had similar scores across all again. And this led to the idea about general intelligence, or a G, sparking a debate about the nature of intelligence. Um, Today we know that there are many different genes and cognitive systems involved in IQ, this which we call IQ, what is measured. And not all are necessarily correlated in every individual, although the average person tends to score average across all of them. Ideas about fluid and crystal intelligence abounded. This is another concept which can be debated. The idea that the use of existing knowledge was crystallized early in life. This would refer to maybe language, for example. Um, then we had some fluid intelligence. But in the modern day, where we have to acquire so many new skills and so much new knowledge, it really leaves this theory open to critical reflection and critical analysis. So that's another point. Then Thurstone, in the early 20th century, he rejected the idea of G in favour of seven primary mental abilities, and these were verbal, perceptual speed, numerical reasoning, rote memory, word fluency, spatial ability, and inductive reasoning. And so these actually are similar to modern cognitive IQ tests. They actually measure, they test around 14 to 16 different cognitive abilities. So, and they tend to get kind of averages across all of these, and this gives a score on the IQ scale. Many of the abilities appear to be related to each other, so people who score high on one, they also score high on the others. And difficulties on some tests appear to not impair intelligence, but may cause problems with learning. So you might find that people with dyslexia, for example, might be affected in this way, and sometimes people on the autistic spectrum. And some abilities appear to be more closely related to the concept of general intelligence than others. So here's an example of the bell curve, and IQ is generally put at the center as 100 IQ, so that's the midpoint of when you get the average of a whole population. And as you go towards the extremes, you find less and less people who have very low intelligence, people who have very high intelligence. So the vast majority of people are somewhere in the middle between 90 and 110. And you can read about the bell curve in any psychology textbook, or you'll find something about it on the internet. So what's measured in IQ tests? Well, overall IQ is a score that is collated to different scores on all of the 14 to 16 subtests. There are two sub-areas within overall IQ, and that's verbal IQ and performance IQ. And even within those, you can have other groupings. For example, in verbal IQ, you have verbal comprehension and working memory. In performance IQ, you have perceptual organization and processing speed. So, there does seem to be some sub-areas. IQ testing, current tests, this is a range of different tests. So it's picture completion, for example, vocabulary, coding, symbols, similarities, looking at block designs, arithmetic, matrix reasoning, digit span tests, general knowledge, information, picture arrangements, comprehension tests, understanding symbols and sequencing letters and numbers, and assembling pictures like jigsaw puzzles and so on. So there's lots of different tests in one psychological assessment. And also a psychological assessment, a one-on-one psychological assessment, which is usually requested for a child who has maybe some difficulties with learning. You also have observation as a qualitative dimension of the assessment. So this would involve such things as the language, the child's ability to use language, the attitude and appearance of the child, their ability to concentrate and pay attention, their visual, auditory, motor problems, other general observations. The signs of neglect, of course, will be issues in some situations. So the psychologist would make a sort of a qualitative analysis of the child, while at the same time measuring the various scores on the different tests. There are other IQ tests that are often distributed to a group in a classroom situation, like the Drumcondra test, for example. And so all of the children take the test at the same time. So they're maybe less detailed, but they do give an overall score for each child. The usefulness and value of these kind of general tests, they are considered to show whether or not the child is meeting some minimum standards, and whether the child has any special needs. But also they can be controversial, and I think they can be open to some critical analysis on the basis that the services are often not available to children, and sometimes a child might need some different alternative approaches in learning, and so there often are very few options available one way or the other. So, question arises: can IQ increase? Well, first of all, looking at individuals, IQ tests tend to be stable across a lifetime. So, if whatever your IQ is when you're young tends to be stay the same throughout your life, although there are some exceptions to this rule. Early intervention programs with disadvantaged children do show that you can change an individual IQ, um, say 15 points after the first year of preschool education, and up to 5 points difference at age 15. So, and in addition to increasing IQ, these early intervention programs improve overall social and emotional development. Um, so that's the individual case, and people can overcome most early disadvantage in terms of IQ. And early disadvantage has a major impact on social emotional development and lived experience. So, what about groups? The Flynn effect showed that different groups of people actually increased their IQs across different generations, and this shows that IQ is not entirely genetic, that there is an environmental aspect to it, and there are no changes in the genetic code of the different generations. So this research has been very interesting in showing that IQ is greatly affected by education and learning and a rich environment. Um, so twin studies show that the environment accounts for 30 to 50% of intelligence, and there are actually courses in training so people can improve their performance on an IQ test without necessarily increasing their IQ. So this is quite popular in the US, but according to some students here, you can practice these tests online. So it seems to be the idea is to get some experience of IQ tests if you have to go and take one. So that kind of comes to the end of the first lecture. And then next lecture 2 will be about the challenges to this kind of way of thinking about intelligence as IQ. Okay.